You're all set?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm sorry there was confusion about the time, and I've been doing my thankful things on Facebook, and tonight I'm very thankful for my friends Sandra Berger, Fran Pangakis, Jill Kuhn, Nancy Brohan, Carla Gantz. The best thing about, well, there's lots of best things about Career Fusion, but one of the best things is that we have this sisterhood that when we're falling fast, they will catch us when we're falling. So I just want to thank everybody so much for their help because, sometimes you get busy. Anyway, I would like to introduce our amazing Fran. She's going to speak tonight on emotional intelligence, and I can't wait to hear it. So maybe we'll just wait one more minute. And since it's 8 o'clock right on the dot, according to my computer, this is going to be recorded for anybody who, if you have a friend who may not have made it because the time changed, you can let them know that it is recorded and can be viewed later or listened to. We're not viewing Fran tonight. We're listening to Fran tonight. And Joanne says, when money comes by way, we have a guest, Joanne, tonight, who might be attending Career Fusion, and her daughter just is a cheerleader, and they're going to get to go to Disney World to perform. So we were talking about that a little bit earlier when we were getting ready for tonight. So that's going to be very fun and very cool for those kids. My oldest son, Zach, his band, they would go to band competitions, and they won all the time, and we went to Disney World a couple times. It was really fun. We drove to Disney World on a bus. That was really fun. I can tell you that right now. But anyway, I'm going to introduce Fran. Fran, welcome.
Thank you
so much, and it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Sandra. As Diana said, one of the beautiful things, just one of the beautiful things about Career Fusion is the wonderful support and friendships that you make. It's a network of men and women that truly are committed to helping us achieve whatever we dream of. And part of that achievement always has some emotion around it. We've all been in the workplace at some point in time, some of us longer than others, and one of the key things that you hear is that, you leave your emotions at the door. There's absolutely no place for emotions in the workplace. I'm going to introduce you a little bit to the idea of emotions are absolutely critical for how we move through life, professionally and personally. And this is sort of foundational pieces of information about emotional intelligence. And let's just hit the road running, folks. Okay. So, whoops, hold on, got to move things around. Talk about emotions when technology doesn't behave. When I was applying to hygiene school, I never considered myself a really good student. I was an average student and didn't test well and didn't have a high GPA. And what got me into Forsyth was, I believe, truly my personal interview. So it was about how I presented myself, whatever self-confidence I had, how I interacted with people. And I have to wonder sometime if I didn't have some level of understanding about how to work with other people and how to present myself, would I have gotten into hygiene school? This is Rene Descartes, and one of the things that he said is, I think, therefore I am. That statement has sort of been false nowadays because we are not who we just because we think. Thinking is a process of all of us, a part of us, but it is not strictly what I am is what I think. One of the things that we know today is there's a lot of emphasis on all of these. What's my GPA? What's my AP class? How many am I taking? The LSATs, the MCATs, the MTELs, all of these tests. Now, they are required to get to the next level. However, one of the things that I'm going to talk to you about this evening is the fact that being smart does not come strictly from how well you can take a test. And you know, we've always somewhat seen a backlash, especially I think with our younger people, that they struggle so hard to get into these AP classes that there is a complete emotional breakdown at some point in time later because they've never had a chance to thrive as just individuals and be a total and complete person. I know in the workplace we are always looking for the best and the brightest. And if that's judged best and the brightest strictly on how smart someone appears or how many degrees they have after their name or how many initials they have after their name, you know, we can miss someone who can be an outstanding employee and yet not have all of the courses and all of the, you know, the education in the traditional sense, and yet they are a phenomenally effective employee. This next slide was really interesting to me when I first saw it. Too much college, too little kindergarten. It goes back to what we have put the emphasis on is our IQ. Now we all know people like this who may be off the chart brilliant, very high IQ, but very little EQ. Now Robert Fulghum, if some of you may have read his book, Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. His lessons were about playing fair. Don't hit people. Say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. We talk about that and say, you know, remember the play nice in the sandbox. Well, these are really good lessons, and yet somehow as we grow up and we get caught up in the world going 90 million miles around us, we forget about the simple things. But they are ultimately very important in how we progress and succeed through life. And by the way, you will see this referred to as EQ. The Q stands for quotient, just like in the IQ it's intelligence quotients, and so for the EQ it's emotional quotients. That's just the number as it's expressed. IQ is also just a measure, and I keep saying just, is a measure of cognitive intelligence. It measures our verbal and mathematical skills, and an average IQ is at about 100. So it doesn't take much to have an IQ. That means you can graduate high school. And if you graduate high school, there are many, many people that can do amazing things without going on to further education. So similarly, EQ is a measure of the emotional intelligence that's expressed as a number. For those of you who are fusionistas, you know in your Drake assessment, page 7 is your emotional intelligence score. So that was your EQ. It gives us a graph of where we fall on the core competencies in the EQ world. You go back and forth between EI, emotional intelligence, and EQ. You're really talking about EI, emotional intelligence, tonight, and not so much about the EQ, the quotient. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be looking at this evening. So we're going to talk a little bit about social and emotional intelligence. I was certified last year through the Institute of Social and Intelligent Emotional Coaching. So it breaks it down into social and emotional. Social does not mean, you know, being able to go out and have a party and have a good time. I think that's important, but that's not what we're going to be looking at it today. Talk a little bit about a history of the field and why do we care? What does it bring to us in a medical dental world? Answer some of the so what questions. Talk a little bit about the science behind emotions, and then we're going to talk about the 4-quadrant model and some of the core competencies. Again, tonight's sort of like the introductory course about it, and if we need to spend another webinar on going through more detailed, I'd be happy to do so. And of course at Career Fusion, I'm always available to talk to individuals as they go through this process. Okay, so how do you define the leader? One of the things that I do is work a lot with teams on their development, and I oftentimes ask that question, is leadership a role or is it a choice? So in some parts, certainly the person who owns the business, and if it's a dentist, they are the owner of the business, there are certain leadership roles that they have to play. And yet, leadership is a choice. All of us are leaders. And for me, the simplest way of thinking about leadership is as long as someone is observing how I behave, that gives another person or a group of people the opportunity to follow and mimic my behavior. So on being a leader, and each one of us, whether we're in a clinical setting or we have changed and we're in a corporate setting or we're independent business owners, we are leaders at every step of the way. And here's a quote by Warren Bennis: "Emotional intelligence is much more powerful than IQ in determining who emerges as a leader. IQ is a threshold of competence. You need it, but it doesn't make you a star. Emotional intelligence can." And one of the things in the business world that we know is that a business leader will get hired for what they have done in the past or what they say they can do, and when they are terminated or fired, it's because of the lack of emotional intelligence. They just didn't quite get the concept of how to handle and manage people who they are trying to inspire as a leader. So if all of us are leaders, it's pretty important, I think, that we understand how we use our emotions to help us succeed. So what is it? Here's the definition. There's a couple of various definitions. This is the one that I use the most. Social and emotional intelligence is the ability to be aware of our own emotions and those of others in the moment, and to use that information so we can manage ourselves and manage our relationships. So you'll see I have certain words that are highlighted. The first word, aware. How often do we go through life day to day and we're just on a rat race? We're just on that treadmill. We are not living in a world of awareness. Another term that people use is being mindful, living in a mindful place. There's a lot of school systems, I've done some reading, that talk about their teaching living mindfully to the students, and the younger you can introduce this concept to kids, the difference and the greater success they have in understanding their roles in life. So mindfulness is being aware of what's going on inside you first and your environment. The next set is in the moment. You know, it kind of goes back to hindsight is 20/20. How many of us have kind of like slapped our foreheads and said, "Oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. If I could take it back, I would." Or have you ever said, "Oh, I really didn't mean that"? Because once something came out of your mouth or you behaved in such a way that the behavior wasn't very becoming, you kind of thought, "Oh God, I just shouldn't have done that." So we can manage ourselves and then manage our relationships. Even the most task-driven person has to have some level of a relationship with another human being. Unless you are truly living a hermit life, at some point in your day you will come in contact with another human being. And how do you manage that time? We all understand that some of us like a lot more people contact than others, and some of us, you know, life would be great if it wasn't for other people. And yet you're having to deal with people at some point in time. So that's the definition of social and emotional intelligence. This particular model uses a 4-quadrant model. The 4-quadrant model is based on Daniel Goleman, and about 75% of Fortune 500 companies use this particular model. The reason is because it's very simple to understand and incorporates us as yourself, and then it incorporates other people. So we talked about how aware you are of yourself, and then we talk about the relationship and management of yourself and then other people. The Drake's formula is the same, so those of you who do have your Drake, it means those first 3 competencies are the self-awareness and the self-management, so it is the left-hand column, and the other 2 sections are the right-hand column. So if you have your Drake in front of you, you just bracket those first 3 together, and it's the left-hand column, and it's the right-hand column for the other 2. So we're going to start with understanding this is the foundational piece. Let's talk a little bit about behavior and how behavior can be changed. So one of the things that we know is genetics essentially is We are born with certain genetic traits. The facial feature, how tall we are, our eye color. I can't say hair color anymore because I don't think I was born with this hair color anymore. So you can't really use hair color. But that's our genetic background that essentially comes from conception. Mom, dad, science class, sperm and egg, that is our genetic material that is passed on. We also know that doesn't change over a lifetime. And IQ actually falls into genetic background material. Your IQ doesn't change as over the years. The only thing that happens with IQ is as we get older, we learn and gather more information. The second circle is our personality, and essentially that is in debate whether it's genetic or environmental, but psychologists tell us that our personality is pretty much formed by the time we are 6 to 7 years old. That does not change either. We have certain behavioral preferences, and so that's sort of in between the genetics and the personality. And then the last circle is what we talk about as the behavior. So our behavior is driven by the environment. We're going to behave according to what the environment tells us or we need to do. And then, of course, it also is about someone else who changes our environment or creates a behavior change in us. Here's the piece that I think is the most powerful takeaway from this slide. Behavior is a choice. We choose how we behave. Can't choose your genetics, can't choose your personality. We can, in fact, choose how we behave. And part of that starts to link up with our behavior is brought about oftentimes by thoughts and emotions that then trends into how we behave. Thoughts have to always believe everything we think. Stop and think of that statement. Do you always have to believe everything you think? Someone described it one time as stinking thinking. We all have negative voices. We all have, voices that tell us we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not tall enough, we're not thin enough, whatever. Think of all the thoughts that you have in your head, and those thoughts create and evoke an emotion. The thoughts are also what we call stories. We create a story about a situation. We create a story about a scenario. We create a story about somebody else. And if that story is negative, the emotion can be powerful, it can be destructive. But remember, they are stories until we get it confirmed. It's a thought. Those two put together can oftentimes bring about our behavior. So depending on how well and mindful we are of our thoughts, and then we are mindful of our emotions, we can change our behavior in how we respond to a particular situation. I said let's talk a little bit about history, because this isn't something new. And sometimes I feel as if people thinking, okay, so this is the latest and the greatest, and it's kind of soft and fluffy and woo-woo. Well, if we look here, the first evidence we have of people talking about social intelligence is actually in the 1930s, and it's Edward Thorndike. And he describes the concept of the ability to get along with other people. I am positive we have all met someone in our lives, one of us may be that person, that just has a really hard time getting along with other people. They're called prickly, they're called fussy. Well, there's other terms that people use for them also. But think about it. So 1930 is when we first started to see the concept that it's important to get along with other people, play nice in the sandbox. Certainly in IQ, those of us, even Psychology 101, remember the Binet test, and when we're starting to talk about how we measure our cognitive abilities. And then as it progresses along the scale, you can see that right up to 2011, we're talking about various factors that emotional intelligence is gaining a lot more play about being successful. You see, 1995, the book came out by Daniel Goleman, which is Emotional Intelligence. Daniel Goleman was a science writer at the New York Times, and he was also a Harvard-trained psychologist. And his first book was Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. From that point, it sort of has just taken off. If you Google emotional intelligence, you will have over 2 million hits on various articles, information, white papers, scientific papers, and on and on. So another piece of the history, and this is one that really got me excited, is Howard Gardner. Howard Gardner actually is right here, and I'm in Boston. He's in Cambridge, next town over. He teaches at Harvard. He came up with the idea that there's got to be something more than IQ again. So you can start to see a pattern here. There's got to be something more than just, I can take a test and pass. And if we look at this list, we all know people who can fall into these categories, that they can have an intelligence surpassing your own or outstandingly brilliant in any one of these categories. Do we all know that someone that's just phenomenal with words? What does a writer do? I mean, it's not easy for me to write. I'm so envious of someone that can just sit down and write a novel and evoke these memories, evoke these emotions. You look at J.K. Rowling and the 7 books with Harry Potter. Where does that verbal intelligence come from? Math, logical. Math, it's like, okay, I get confused with it once you get past 2 and 2. People that are visual, spatial, musical, who can sit down and write music. And look at bodily and kinesthetic. Athletes that just have an innate intelligence about how their body moves and works. He added the last 2, and it's also intelligence about intrapersonal and intra. How well do you get along with yourself? How well do you understand yourself? And how well do you get along with others? So from this position, it was one of the founding pieces of information that as people started looking at emotional intelligence, it was the interpersonal and the intrapersonal that did some of the foundational research work. So you can see it has a long history. It's not something new. And let's just ask the question, so what? Okay, that's kind of fun. Big deal. Well, one of the things that we know, dentistry has 2 components to it. Dentistry has a hard side to it, and that's our clinical skills. That's the tactical side. That's the dental school side. Those are the systems. We have processes and systems in place. We also know that dentistry and medicine have a soft side, and we call these the soft skills. So let's look a little bit about what happens when you have emotional intelligence in these 3 areas. So first of all, with employees, we know that number 1, when there's a healthy social and emotional individual as well as a socially and healthy emotional team, you have job satisfaction. You can really look at the job and you're happy with what you have, not always looking at the grass is greener on the other side. You have greater retention, performance, teamwork. You also get a team that understands the value of working through conflict. I say that I'm glad that teams have, dysfunction because that keeps me employed. The flip side to it, it's also frustrating because you're trying to coach and teach people that conflict is actually healthy. But conflict has a lot of emotions around it. And it increases productivity. So when I'm talking to a group of dentists and I'm saying that these soft skills will actually increase your financial bottom line, sometimes they go, come on, I need the system. That's what's going to make the difference in my practice. The majority of practices that I work with or have had the opportunity to go in and observe, it is rarely a major systems problem. It is a people problem, and it is people problems with emotions, that the emotions are just all over the place. They're not being managed. People aren't aware of them. So it does keep me employed. So for the business side, Customer satisfaction. Customer service is all about having someone else feel good about deciding to give you their money. The business grows. You're actually more competitive. One of the things that I tell the teams that I work with on a regular basis is, if we learn this stuff, that's your cutting edge against your dentist competitor down the street. If they're just doing the systems, trust me, this is what will make the difference. This is where you kind of draw the line in the sand. And then finally, personally, we have healthier relationships, a decrease in drug and alcohol use. Because what does drug and alcohol use mean? It's usually trying to mask some level of a really painful emotion. You know, years ago I had a health issue that required me to take some narcotics. Well, when the health issue went away and there was an emotional pain, I realized that that narcotic still made me feel good because it dulled the emotional pain. You get your health and a higher quality of life, and you live longer. There's so many people, Louise Hay, Deepak Chopra, that are talking about a longer life by managing emotions. So how can we ignore it? So it's a big, important so what. A little bit about a business. We're not going to talk a lot about the traditional business model, but here's something that I absolutely find fascinating. Let's look at some of the companies who have embraced social and emotional training in their business world. So as these companies come into our vision, is anyone out there thinking the Air Force? The Marines? Think of these. This is military. We don't have any softies. We don't talk about emotions. And yet there are documented studies that the Air Force increased the level of promotions and had healthier relations as the men and women were promoted up the ranks. The Marines increased their recruitment capabilities and therefore they increased their recruitment profitability, but they decreased their financial outlay and having people cut out. And you can see all of these companies have incorporated some level of training of emotional intelligence. And the higher up you can go, the better off we are. But what about us? We're in a health and wellness world. We're about making our patients get healthy. And I know that so many of us are really tied with the oral and health systemic health link. We cannot ignore emotions. One of the things that we know, people with positive emotions, less risk of chronic diseases, fewer symptoms, recover quicker. And so many research studies are focusing on this. Martin Seligman, who basically works out of the University of Pennsylvania, and he is the Happiness Project, when he started his research about 15 years ago, he says everybody studies people who are dysfunctional. Let's look at people who are happy, and let's see what they're doing that makes them happy. And as a result, these are some of the things that he found. You can manage disease a lot easier. You can recover a lot quicker. Well, let's talk about an actual study, and it's called the NUN study. So the NUN study it's an ongoing study actually. It's a $5 million study that was funded by the NIH at the University of Minnesota. And it was with the School Sisters of Notre Dame in Mankato. And it's a kind of retirement community for nuns. Well, the most surprising finding of this longitudinal study, which is still actually ongoing, is the way we express ourselves in language, even at an early age, can almost foretell how long we'll live and how vulnerable we may be to diseases like Alzheimer's down the road. Just think about that. The words that we use, if they are positive words, that can impact how we grow old. Well, so what the researchers found, they analyzed autobiographies of 200 nuns that were written when they first took their holy orders. and found that the sisters who would express the most positive emotions in their writing are the ones that ended up living the longest. And those on the road to Alzheimer's expressed fewer and fewer positive emotions as their mental functions declined. What's interesting about this, as a study group, it was powerful because they're pretty relatively uniformed as a group. Their socioeconomic status, their health, their diet, their living conditions were relatively similar. So it is a good control group to study. And so here you can see that those who expressed positive words deemed most cheerful lived about 7 years longer. And those who express positive emotional words, 9.5 years. And when you had a variety of positive words, 10.5 years longer they lived. I just think that's fascinating to stop and think about. If from a young age we have a hard time using positive words, that can impact us 50, 60, 70 years down the road. So start thinking those positive words. Here's another positive benefit. We actually earn more money over the course of our lifetime. Now, Ed Diner coined the term, it's called subjective well-being, because as a researcher he didn't want to go into the happiness world because, again, that's sort of like too warm and fuzzy, and we wanted data and structure, so he termed it subjective well-being. But what he found was people with more positive outlooks earned more money. And I can tell you that in working with teams, oftentimes if we're doing a salary review with an employee, one of the things the doctor will say is, yeah, they may be really good technically, but boy, they just come in and they're grumpy all the time and nothing's ever good enough and they're always picking what doesn't work and they're just telling me about how miserable this is, and I don't really feel I want to give them a raise because, well, they just do their job. There's no other intrinsic value. Now, some of you might be saying, well, that's not fair. They do the job. Well, there's a lot more than just doing the job of what we're going to say cleaning teeth. Of course, we all know it's much more than that. But you may want to know how much more do you earn over your lifetime. 33% more based on this study. I don't know. That's an awful lot of money. 33% more. Just by if I can learn how to manage my emotions and look at the positive things in life. A few more personal benefits. Again, achievement, creativity. We get stuck. If we're stuck in a negative world, a negative place, we lose all creativity. We really come to a dead stop. Decision making. One of the things that we spend a lot of time on is patient education, and we talk about it, and yet I will tell you right now, patients make decisions based on an emotional component. It is not rational nor logical. And improved memory, and that kind of goes back to the Nun study. Let's talk a little bit about the brain science. It all starts here. It's all in the brain. Look at this study from the Institute of Heart Math. So when they monitor people and they're in the negative mode of frustration, look at where their EKG goes. It's short and spiky and it's just clustered and it's all over the place, but it's in real erratic spurts. It's almost, I'm going to say, it looks rough. It looks spiky is the only word that comes to me. And yet look at how someone's heart responds when the emotion of appreciation is experienced. You still have up and down. You still have a movement, a wave movement, but it's smoother. And think about what you're like when you're in the throes of having an emotional negative explosion in your body. It starts in the brain. Your brain is just going to spit out all kinds of negative stuff. Well, what's one of the negative things that it spits out? Cortisol. We know that's the stress hormone. And here's the part that becomes interesting to, I think, us as dental healthcare professionals, is not only the fight or flight experience, But long-term consequences. Look at that list and tell me everything that we do in helping people stay healthy isn't affected by this. Elevated blood sugars, we know what happens to patients with diabetes. Increased bone loss, we know what the consequence is. Compromised immune function. Decreased skin repair and regeneration. Increased fat accumulation. Well, that maybe doesn't happen with our teeth, but it destroys brain cells too. When I look at this information, it reminds me of this patient I had. His name was Art. At the time, I didn't correlate it other than I could tell. Art would come in every 3 to 4 months. We had done periotherapy. You know, he sort of was my patient. I'd say, hey, I got something new. Let's try it. And yet, I knew when Art's life was going well because his oral health was healthier looking. Now, he didn't have a lot of changes in terms of bone growth or stability, but there was this other piece to how his mouth looked when life was going well for him. But when life wasn't, and he was in the process of losing his job, he was at a high level of management, didn't know where he was going to go. His marriage was not very stable. So we're talking about some of the biggest important things that create heavy-duty emotions for us. And there was a direct correlation with how his oral health was when he was feeling good about what life was or when it wasn't feeling so good. So how can we ignore this? We have to think about the emotions and how it plays with our patients and wellness. So let's talk a little bit about breaking it down again. So we said this is the 4-quadrant model. So it's about ourselves, how aware are we of ourselves, how we manage ourselves, and then how aware we are of other people and how we manage our relationship with other people. So there we are. When you look in the mirror, do you see a little kitty or do you see a lion? Do you feel confident about yourself? How accurate is that about your strength? Do you say good things about yourself, or can you only pick out the negatives? The flip side is, do you overestimate your personal powers? You know, there is that other side to it. You know, do you give yourself more credit than you really have? How aware are you of your personal strengths? You know, as a female, can you see yourself as assertive and look at that as positive? Or do you see yourself as aggressive if you're a female, or how do other people see you? But you look in the mirror and this little orange kitty sees a lion. I was going to put the butterfly on the lion's nose, but I thought, no, I'll put it on top of the mirror. But that's what we want to see. When you look in the mirror, what do you see? And how confident are you with your personal and self? Do you know yourself? And do you understand your capabilities and self-confidence? Self-management, so that's how we manage our internal self, our impulses. Look at the behavioral pieces that come out under self-management. Realistic optimism. Can we see setbacks as manageable, or are they pervasive, or are they permanent, or are they personalized? Do we take every setback as a very personal issue? Is it permanent? And is it pervasive? It's also about realistic optimism. There's actually, you know, being negative on occasion is healthy, because you wouldn't have a set point of understanding happiness if you were just always walking around with your head up in the clouds. But it's realistic optimism. How about stress management? Can you work calmly under stress and pressure? You know, when that schedule is just jam-packed and you're running behind and it's like crazy town, do you know how to manage yourself so that it stays in a state of you're at least responding still, not just reacting? Intentionality. Are you thinking and acting on purpose so that you're aware of what's going on for you? All of these things, if you look at them, can make a massive and major impact in how successful we are, professionally and personally. So we're going to go to the other 2 columns now, and that's the social awareness. I love this. This is Aaron Feuerstein. What a story. Aaron Feuerstein actually owned a company called Malden Mills, and it was here actually in New England, and he made Polartec, you know, the fleeces and things like that. In 1995, the building was destroyed by fire. 2,000 people in that community worked for his company, and as he was watching his building burn down, Aaron Feuerstein said, "I am going to pay the salary and benefits for each one of these employees until my company and the factory gets rebuilt." He knew what it meant to these people that to be out of a job because his factory burnt down. Unfortunately, I can give examples on the not so nice side where I've also heard of doctors, well, they'll say to me, "I haven't had a raise in the past 6 months, 12 months, 3 years, whatever. Therefore, my staff isn't getting a dime." I can also tell you that with the number of dentists that I've had take this is not one of the highest scores that we get in dentistry. Neither do we get it in medicine. Medical schools today are having to teach empathy. That always begs the question, can empathy be taught? What kind of social awareness do you have in your environment? What kind of service ethic do you have? Do you understand what it means to serve someone else, or do you have some internal little emotion kind of saying, "I'm not serving anybody. How come no one's serving me first?" Really important factors in how we move forward in life. And the last column was stuck. Relationship management. Oops, sorry. My computer is misbehaving. So, okay, let's do this right, folks. Relationship management. You're part of a team at any point. A family, you're part of a team. If you belong to a community, if it's a religious community, if you're working in a group, all of these things are part of how you manage relationships with other people. Do you have the skills to understand what it means to communicate attentively? Listen attentively. Can you use your interpersonal effectiveness and have diplomacy and tact? I'm embarrassed to oftentimes hear the not such nice stories about our profession, that this isn't always, we don't play nice in the sandbox. This is the piece that becomes critical. Do we understand what it means? What's the emotion about building bonds with other people? And maybe building bonds with people that we don't like so much. Now, it's very clear that we like our patients, but in the group of the people that we work with, sometimes this one gets to be tough to deal with. Building trust. You know, it's easy to talk about trust, but we have to ask, are we trustworthy first? Do we have actions and behaviors that allow someone else to trust in us? So you can see that the power of all of these is what ultimately creates an environment where we succeed. First, we learn about ourselves. Then we manage our relationship with other people. So one of the things that we can actually talk about is pure logic has no heart. If we were to look back historically, if someone is going to do something based on pure logic, there is no kindness involved in it. There is no heart. And logic will always, always be superseded by our emotions. Your brain can actually only handle about 5 to 6 logical components where emotions just can be all over the place. The flip side to it is, you know, pure emotion has no reasoning either. You need a balance. You just can't be walking around in this state of constant emotions without having some level of logic and rational thought. It's when they meet together. So you have a balance of emotion and logic, and that's where it gives us our success. Awareness, mindful living, you know, using and learning the tools. And here's the beautiful part. Remember we said IQ, you got what you got. Personality, It's pretty much you got what you got. You can adapt it, however, it doesn't change. This can be learned, and this is why it's so powerful for me to be able to have the opportunity to talk to people about it. So here are some common questions that I always get asked. Do I need to have competencies in all of these areas to have a high EQ? No. You can be more competent in one over the other, and some in life and some in work. Some positions call for more competencies in certain emotional intelligence. One of the ones I can talk to you about is customer service. There has to be a high level of emotional intelligence for empathy if you're in a customer service oriented workplace. Physicians, I said earlier that medical schools are now teaching empathy or trying to teach empathy. Clearly, that's a more important competency. And are some competencies more important than others? Well, here's what we can say that yes, some are, and it has to take a look at what you are doing currently right now. What does your job require? What is your role in your professional world require, and prioritize your actions, and that's what you would develop. If it requires certain, again, building bonds, being trustworthy, those are the emotional components that you would work through, and they can be worked through easily. So here's some simple steps. So this is kind of like a little easy piece to think about. I want you to think about a time when you personally had what we call an emotional hijacking. That's when your behaviors were not necessarily the most pleasant, or the words that came out of your mouth didn't serve you very well. So what was the emotion that you were experiencing? And I will tell you, this is very difficult to do. Remember in that slide that we talked about thoughts, and then we talked about emotions, and then behavior was above that? One of the things that we really kind of blur the lines, what we think or the story that we tell ourselves is not the emotion. So oftentimes I will say to someone, tell me what you were feeling, and they'll go ahead and give me the story. And I'll have to say, that's the thought. Tell me the emotion. And it usually takes 2 or 3 questions to kind of get to the emotion. Emotion, sad, glad, happy, mad, angry, frustrated, elated, irritated. That's one word. Optimistic, dejected, all over the range. But identify the emotion that when you did something, you behaved in such a way that maybe didn't serve you the best. What was the emotion? So can you understand then the source of the emotion? I call this what was your hot button that got pushed. We all have hot buttons. And an easy way of thinking about this, we all have hot buttons while we're driving usually. Someone cuts you off. A hot button for me is you get behind someone and they're at the light, and when the light turns green, then they turn their blinker on to take a left-hand turn. Well, I get annoyed. Road rage would mean an extreme of that emotion. So the source of that emotion, I anticipated that I was going to be able to go straight through. This car in front of me decided that once the light turned green, then they turned their left-hand blinker on. So for me, the source of the emotion was they didn't let me know ahead of time, and I got irritated. Just understanding what I was feeling. Here's the question, but how is it serving me? At that particular time, it's probably not serving me very well, because I'm either going to climb up their backside or I'm going to rush through the light. I'm not going to be aware of my environment. And I may not see the car coming from another position. I may not see the car taking another turn. It's not serving me well. If you can think of a situation that had happened in a relationship, how did it serve you when that emotion exploded, when that hot button got pushed? Did it serve you well? And you walk through the steps. So again, what was that emotion? Identify, name the emotion, understand the source of the emotion, and then ask yourself the question, how is this serving me well? The emotional intelligent comment or answer will be based on you, not putting it onto somebody else. Well, I would have been fine if only they had done that. That doesn't work that way. You got to look inward first. So self-awareness is first, and then the management and the relationship with others. And then finally, what are the tools you're going to activate to manage your response? One of the great stories that I tell when we're doing this workshop is about the JetBlue flight attendant. How many of you remember it was a couple of years ago that this particular JetBlue flight attendant exited a plane in not such a graceful manner? If you don't remember the story, he was so frustrated, and most of us didn't know the background story. The background story came out afterwards. He had just lost his father about 6 months before. He was caring for a dying mother, and he was a flight attendant, and if any of you fly on a regular basis, it's not fun. Well, this particular time, someone was giving him a very difficult time, and he basically had an emotional hijacking. So what he did, he didn't manage his response. It was purely gut reactive. The plane landed. They pulled up, but before they pulled up to the jetway, he opened the door, he activated the slide, and he slid out. But before he did that, he grabbed 2 beers, and he gave everyone a gesture, let's put it that way, and off he went. Well, clearly, that was, you talk about, the emotion and what was the source of it, and did it serve him well? No, unfortunately, he lost his job. So what were the tools that he could have activated ahead of time to not have gotten him to this position? There's all kinds of tools in how we learn how to manage our emotions. You always want to start first in understanding your body. What's your body telling you? Think about a time that you had a really strong emotion and your body spoke to you first. You had something in the pit of your stomach, your hands got sweaty, your heart started racing, your shoulders ached, something. And then what do? Deep breathing, rolling your shoulders, taking a walk, something to start to manage that response. And starting to listen to yourself. What's your self-talk? If it's always going to be putting you down, well, that's not going to help you moving forward on this process. So, as we said, emotions will always trump reason. Always, always, always. Even the most logical person, emotion will trump reason. So, as we come to the end, here's a quote. Anyone can become angry. It's easy. But to be right with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that is not easy. Think about that. So as we close for tonight, Thanksgiving is coming up. Thanksgiving is a time when it evokes a lot of emotion. It's an emotion of gratitude. It's an emotion of giving thanks for what we have around us. Think of the positive part of the holiday and take this time to be thankful for what you do have over looking at what might be missing in your life or what's lacking in your life. Think about what you're grateful for. On Facebook, we've seen this going around now that every day people post one thing that they're grateful for. And sometimes it's tough to find enough things for a whole month that you're going to be grateful for. But I challenge you, look around, look at the emotions that are tied with feeling grateful for what you do have, and they're there. You just need to become aware of them. So, thank you. Again, this was an introduction to the beginning parts of emotional intelligence. If you can't tell, I love this stuff, and I absolutely love being able to share it with my colleagues and my peers and, using it in clinical practice as well.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Fran.
Yes. Fran, thank you so much. That was amazing, as usual.
Yes.
And again, this has been recorded, so if anybody knows someone who missed it because of the time change, it's been recorded. It will be available probably in a couple of days on the website. And Fran is going to be doing our Centrifusion in December, a little deeper dive. So it will be posted correctly with the time and with well advanced notice. So that's going to be better for next month. And
yeah, and that one, Diana, will also be about the Drake. So for people who are new to Career Fusion, we're going to review the Drake and the personalities and the profile. And you can always contact me. Everyone, my colleagues all know you can certainly send me an email. I'll be always happy to answer any questions. If we have some new people that are coming on for the first time when I meet you in January, if you have a question ahead of time about emotional intelligence or after we do the Drake webinar, I am always available.
And I just wanted to add my 2 cents. Those of you who were here when we were chatting before, I have 2 sons that are officers in the Air Force, and Warren Bennis and all of these, EQ things are things that are coming back to me from how I've tried to teach them. Now that they're being taught how to be leaders, it really helps in all aspects.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra, because I know you both your boys are in the Air Force. When we were talking about that, I was waiting for you to see that slide because the Air Force I have some amazing research material on how the Air Force has actually integrated emotional intelligence into their programs.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
awesome.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Have a good evening and happy Thanksgiving.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.